Today we will be looking at bankruptcy filing trends by chapter in the state of Maryland. To do this, we have about a dozen charts showing bankruptcy activity in the state going back to 1990. All this filing data comes from the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. Now, this first chart shows total filings by year since 1990 in the state. And during that time, there have been about 625,000 cases filed in the state. In the early 1990s, filings were running around 15 to 18,000 per year. This jumped up quite a bit in the late 1990s. So from, say, 1997 to 2004, filings were running around 30 to 35,000 per year. There was a bump up in filings in 2005 due to bankruptcy reform, but not as much as most other states saw, actually. Followed by a large filings were down by nearly 3/4 the next year. Then they jumped up quite a bit as the recession came on and got back up to nearly 30,000 per year, which is double where they'd been in the early 1990s, but not quite as high as they were prior to bankruptcy reform. And since then have dropped down to under 20,000 again. So right now filings are about the same as they were, say, back in 1995, but way below where they were in the years prior to bankruptcy reform. This map shows filings relative to population over the period from 1990 to 2015. The red states are places with the highest bankruptcy rates. Yellow tends to be the very lowest. And Maryland is very close to the average. Overall, it's about 6% above the average during that period of time. And if you're looking at this year by year, you can see that from about 1997 to 2003, Maryland was around 20-25% above average. But most other years, in both before and after that, they've been very close to the average per year. But there was one period of time where the rate was quite high in Maryland. Looking at Chapter 7 filings by year, and this is the same general pattern as it was with total filings, around 10 to 12,000 in the early 1990s each year, over 20,000 from every year from 1997 to 2004, some spike in 2005, but not as much as other places. Drop off of more than 80% in 2006. And then some big increases. So filings were about 5 times as high by 2010, and then they have dropped, well back. And so right now filings are about where Chapter 7 filings are about where they were in 1995, and about 1/2 of where they were from 1997 to 2004. This chart shows Chapter 11 filings by year, and you see, kind of a major decrease throughout most of the 1990s. Since then, about 150 per year, most years, with more during recessions. Let's see, 2002 was an exception, but there were about 230 related cases involved with the ECS Emergency Services case. So without them, filings would have been right comparable. It'd be a much smoother chart for that. Looking at Chapter 13 filings per year, and this is kind of a different pattern than with the other chapters. You had around 4,000 per year in the early 1990s, then a big run-up to 2002. We got up to over 11,000. A big drop-off by at least 60% by 2006, which is way more than more of a decline than most places showed. Some increases through the recession, and then the last 5 years have been fairly flat, around 5,000 or 6,000 per year. So Chapter 13 in the state are well above where they were back in the early 1990s, but they are also way down, by about half from the late 1990s to 2003 compared to now. They're down by about 1/2. Looking at the percent of cases filed as Chapter 13, you can see that Maryland has tracked the national average has been right around 30% nearly every year, with some disruption before and after bankruptcy reform. Throughout the 90s, or most 90s, Maryland was a little below average. Early 2000, they're a little above average, and they've dropped back down below the national average right now. But right now, about 30% of cases filed in Maryland are Chapter 13. Now, this chart shows the unemployment rate by quarter in Maryland since 2006, and this is kind of a proxy of how the state economy has been. And you can see that with Maryland, in 2006, it was running around 4%, went up to nearly 8% in 2009, 2010, around the Great Recession, and has dropped back down. And so both the national and in Maryland, the rate is below 5% right now. But you can see that the gap in between Maryland and the national was higher during the recession, which kind of indication that Maryland maybe wasn't as hard as some of the other states, at least employment-wise. Now, filings peaked most recently nationwide in September 2010. Since then, they're down 49% nationwide. And Maryland, the decline is right at 40%. And so they're kind of on the border of being colored yellow, which are the states with the lowest declines in recent years. The biggest declines have been in the Southwest and in most of New England, but Maryland is down about 40%, which is less than average. Looking quarter by quarter of the declines, you can see that the blue columns are Maryland. They had larger declines in 2011 and maybe 2014 and 15, and other periods the declines have been fairly small. Right now we can see that both the national decline and Maryland, the rate is slowing down. But it's kind of an unclear pattern, too, of exactly where things are going to go. In the first 6 months of the year, Maryland was down by 3.6%, which was a smaller decrease than the 5.9% nationwide. You can see a number of states, the ones that are colored red here, actually had increases in the first half of the year. And this is kind of a new development in that if we looked at this any year from 2011 to 2015, you wouldn't see any states colored red. But in the most recent quarter, filings were down about 15% in Maryland, so maybe haven't hit bottom yet. I think that the overall outlook is that there'll be about 17,000 cases filed this year in Maryland, and next year ought to be just about the same, with small increases in the years after that. I don't see any return to the 30,000 to 35,000 cases per year that were filed from, say, 1997 to 2005, unless another recession hits or some sort of major bankruptcy legislation comes along. Okay. Well, that concludes our look at bankruptcy filings in Maryland. For more statistical information and other information on bankruptcy, be sure to visit the newsroom section of the ABI website at www.abi.org.